You can't take my glory, so your life ends here. Those were the last words my admiral said before he shoved me off the helicopter, and for a moment, I truly thought the sky would be the last thing I ever saw. The rage in his eyes. God, I can still see it. 20 years of service, 20 years of bleeding for this country, and this is how it ends? Pushed out of a helicopter by the man I trusted with my life? The man who was supposed to bring me home? Before I tell you what happened next, please like this video, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from, because what happened in that helicopter wasn't just attempted murder, it was the moment he learned who I really am. But let me start from the beginning, because the betrayal, it cuts deeper when you understand what led to that moment. What kind of monster wears the same uniform as you and decides your life is expendable for his own glory? The mission was supposed to be routine. Simple extraction, quick debrief, return to base. I'd just completed a classified operation, one that had taken months of planning, weeks of deep cover work, and nearly cost me everything. But we got the target. We neutralized the threat. And for once, for one goddamn time, I thought I'd done something that mattered. Something that would make a difference. Admiral Kendricks was supposed to extract me personally. That should have been my first red flag. A flag officer doesn't usually handle routine pickups, but I was exhausted, running on fumes and adrenaline, and I just wanted to get home. I wanted to see familiar faces. I wanted to feel safe again. The helicopter ride back to base. Jesus, the tension in that aircraft was suffocating. Kendricks hadn't said a word since I climbed aboard. Not good job, not mission accomplished, nothing. He just sat there, jaw clenched, staring out into the darkness like I wasn't even there. Like I was already dead. I should have known. 20 years in the service, and you develop instincts about these things. The way someone holds their shoulders when they're planning something. The way they avoid eye contact when they've already made a decision that's going to hurt you. But I was tired. So damn tired. We were maybe 15 minutes out from base when he finally moved. I remember hearing the click of his harness unbuckling, and something in that sound made my blood run cold. But before I could react, before I could even ask what he was doing, he was on me. His hands were on my safety harness, and I could feel the straps loosening. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted over the rotor noise, but he wasn't listening. His face was twisted with something I'd never seen before, pure, concentrated hatred. That's when he leaned in close enough that I could feel his breath on my ear, and he whispered those words that still echo in my nightmares. "You took my spotlight. You don't deserve to return alive." And then he shoved me. The fall. Christ, how do you describe falling through empty sky knowing that the man who was supposed to protect you just tried to murder you? The wind tearing at your clothes, the ground rushing up to meet you, and in your head, over and over, the realization that your own commanding officer, a man you'd followed into hell and back, had just thrown you away like garbage. For those first few seconds, I felt something I'd never experienced in 20 years of combat, complete, overwhelming terror. Not the sharp, focused fear you feel when bullets are flying or bombs are dropping. This was different. This was the terror of absolute betrayal, of realizing that the world you thought you understood was built on lies. I was falling, spinning, watching that helicopter get smaller and smaller above me, and all I could think was, this can't be how it ends. Not like this. Not because some corrupt bastard decided I was inconvenient. That's when my training kicked in. 20 years of muscle memory, of drills repeated until they became instinct. I stabilized my fall, got control of my body position, and looked for options. The helicopter wasn't moving away. Kendricks was hovering, probably watching to make sure I hit the ground hard enough to guarantee the job was done. That was his mistake. I grabbed for the landing skid as I fell past it, felt my shoulder nearly tear apart from the impact, but I held on. The pain was excruciating, like someone had set my entire arm on fire, but pain meant I was alive. Pain meant I still had a chance. Hanging there in the darkness, suspended beneath that aircraft by nothing but my grip on cold metal and pure rage, I made myself a promise. I was going to survive this. I was going to climb back into that helicopter. And Admiral Kendricks was going to learn exactly who he'd tried to kill. But here's what that bastard didn't know. Here's the twist that makes this whole nightmare even more personal. Unknown to Admiral Kendricks, that helicopter's surveillance feed was broadcasting live to base. Every single thing that happened in that aircraft was being recorded and transmitted in real time to military headquarters. Command saw everything. They saw him unbuckle my harness. They saw him whisper in my ear. They saw him shove me out of that helicopter like I was nothing more than excess cargo. And they scrambled every available unit the moment they realized what they were watching wasn't some training exercise or equipment malfunction. It was attempted murder. I could hear the radio chatter starting up, voices calling my name, demanding status reports, trying to raise Kendricks. But that son of a bitch had cut communications. He thought he was in control. He thought he could make me disappear and spin some story about equipment failure or enemy action. He thought he was untouchable. He was wrong. While he was up there in that cockpit, probably already rehearsing his lies about how I tragically fell during the extraction, I was pulling myself hand over hand along the landing skid. My muscles screamed with every movement. Blood from where the metal had cut through my gloves was making everything slippery. But I kept climbing. The rotor wash was trying to tear me loose, buffeting me around like a rag doll, but I used my rage as an anchor. Every time I felt my grip slipping, I thought about his words, "You don't deserve to return alive." Every time the pain made me want to let go, I thought about 20 years of service, 20 years of putting my life on the line for this country, and how this corrupt piece of garbage thought he could just erase me for his own advancement. When I finally pulled myself back into that cabin, the look on Kendrick's face, I'll never forget it as long as I live. He'd been celebrating, probably already planning how he was going to claim credit for my mission, how he was going to spin my death into his promotion. And then I appeared behind him like something out of his worst nightmare. His mouth fell open. Just dropped open like his brain couldn't process what his eyes were seeing. He stumbled backward, pressing himself against the opposite wall of the cabin, and for the first time since I'd known him, Admiral Kendricks looked terrified. "How?" he stammered, his voice barely audible over the rotors. "How are you alive?" I didn't answer him right away. I just stood there, dripping blood onto his pristine aircraft, letting him see what 20 years of combat training looks like when it's been pushed past its breaking point. I wanted him to understand that he hadn't just tried to kill a soldier, he'd tried to kill someone who'd spent 2 decades learning how to survive the unsurvivable. That's when I watched his ego collapse in real time. You could see it happening behind his eyes, the sudden realization that he'd committed attempted murder on a live feed being broadcast to military command. That I'd survived his assassination attempt. That his career, his reputation, his freedom, everything he'd tried to preserve by killing me was already gone. He lunged for the radio controls, trying desperately to disable the surveillance feed, but it was too late. The damage was done. Every second of his betrayal was already recorded, already being analyzed by military investigators who were probably drawing up court-martial charges as we flew through the darkness. "You don't understand," he kept saying, his voice getting higher and more desperate with each word. "That operation was mine. I planned it. I coordinated it. You were just the tool I used to execute it. The glory, the recognition, the promotion, it all belongs to me." And that's when I finally understood. This wasn't about military strategy or operational security or any of the noble reasons men like us are supposed to serve. This was about ego. This was about a man so consumed with his own advancement that he was willing to murder a fellow serviceman to claim credit for work he'd never done. "I gave you that mission," he continued, his hands shaking as he tried to justify the unjustifiable. "Without me, you'd still be running training exercises with fresh recruits. I made you. I created your success. And when you started getting recognition that should have been mine, when your name started appearing in classified briefings instead of mine, I realized I had to take back what was rightfully mine. The audacity of it was breathtaking. Here was a man who'd spent his entire career riding the coattails of better soldiers, claiming credit for operations he'd observed from the safety of command centers. And he genuinely believed he deserved recognition for work done in the field by people like me. But I'd heard enough. I reached for my radio, keyed in my call sign, the one he'd obviously forgotten when he decided I was expendable, and transmitted the coded phrase that would change everything. Control, this is Phantom 77, requesting immediate tactical support. Package is secure, but extraction is compromised. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the rotor noise seemed to fade as we both waited for the response. Because that call sign Phantom 77, it wasn't just an identifier. It was a classified designation that triggered automated alert protocols throughout the military intelligence network. It verified my survival and location. It signaled base to activate SEAL Tactical Retrieval Protocol. And it identified me as part of an elite unit that Admiral Kendricks clearly hadn't bothered to research before deciding to commit murder. The moment those words came out of my mouth, I watched his face go white. Not pale. White. Like every drop of blood had just drained from his head as he realized exactly who he'd tried to kill. You're not regular Navy, he whispered, his voice barely audible. No, I replied, keeping my voice level despite the rage burning in my chest. I'm not. And the unit I belong to doesn't take kindly to attempts on the lives of its operators. That's when the radio exploded with activity. Multiple voices, all using codes and designations that made it clear this situation had just escalated far beyond a simple personnel dispute. 2 SEAL tactical choppers were being scrambled. Radar was locking onto our aircraft. Weapon systems were being armed. Not to fire, but to ensure we understood that landing wasn't optional anymore. Command came over the radio with crystal clear instructions. Admiral Kendricks, you are ordered to land immediately. Do not deviate from approved flight path. Do not attempt to evade. Comply immediately or face consequences. But Kendricks wasn't listening anymore. He'd snapped. 20 years of climbing the ranks through politics and backstabbing had finally caught up with him, and he couldn't accept that his career was over. He tried to grab the flight controls, screaming something about how he wouldn't let me destroy everything he'd worked for. That's when I had to make a choice. I could try to reason with a man who'd already demonstrated he was willing to commit murder for his career advancement, or I could do what 20 years of training had prepared me to do. Neutralize the threat. I used a restraint technique I'd learned in close-quarters combat training, designed to subdue without causing permanent damage. It wasn't gentle, nothing about this situation was gentle, but it was effective. Within seconds, Admiral Kendricks was secured, and I had control of the aircraft. The landing was rough. Emergency landings always are, especially when you're operating on adrenaline and rage instead of proper rest and preparation. But we made it down in one piece, and the moment those skids touched the tarmac, we were surrounded by SEAL tactical units who'd been watching this entire nightmare unfold on their monitors. The sight of Admiral Kendricks being dragged out of that helicopter in restraints, in front of dozens of witnesses from his own command, should have given me satisfaction. It should have felt like justice. But all I felt was exhaustion and a deep, bone-deep sadness about what our military had become when men like him could rise to positions of authority. The investigation that followed revealed the full scope of his corruption. It wasn't just about stealing credit for my operation, though that's what triggered his decision to kill me. Military investigators uncovered years of fraudulent reports, stolen valor, and advancement based on lies and manipulation. He'd built his entire career on the backs of better soldiers, claiming their achievements as his own while they did the actual work of serving their country. He'd seen my successful completion of this latest classified operation as the final threat to his house of cards. If I returned and received recognition for my work, if my real record and qualifications were examined too closely, his fraud would be exposed. So he decided the simplest solution was to make me disappear and claim the operation as his own strategic masterpiece. The betrayal runs deeper than just one corrupt officer trying to commit murder. It's about how our system allowed someone like Admiral Kendricks to reach a position where he could make that choice. It's about how many other good soldiers might have been sacrificed on the altar of his ambition before I was lucky enough to survive his attempt. And the fear. Christ, the fear doesn't just go away because justice was served. Even now, months later, I wake up in the middle of the night remembering that moment when I was falling through empty sky, when I truly believed that my own commanding officer had successfully murdered me for his career advancement. The sound of helicopter rotors still makes my hands shake sometimes. The sight of aircraft taking off or landing brings back that moment of absolute betrayal. But what haunts me most is wondering how many others didn't survive their Admiral Kendricks. How many good soldiers died not in service to their country, but as sacrifices to the ambition of corrupt officers who saw them as expendable tools rather than human beings deserving of respect and protection. The strength it took to climb back into that helicopter wasn't just physical. It was the strength of refusing to let evil win. It was the strength of 20 years of service to something greater than myself, even when that service was betrayed by someone who should have embodied those same values. It was the strength of knowing that if I died in that fall, Admiral Kendricks would have continued his corruption, and other soldiers would have suffered the same fate. In the end, the justice that followed wasn't just about punishing one corrupt officer. It was about sending a message throughout the military hierarchy that this kind of behavior has consequences. That rank doesn't protect you when you cross the line from leadership to betrayal. That the soldiers under your command are not your property to dispose of when they become inconvenient. But justice, even when it's served, doesn't erase the pain of betrayal. It doesn't take away the memory of falling through darkness, knowing that someone you trusted wanted you dead. It doesn't restore the faith that was shattered when you realized that the uniform you'd served with honor could be worn by someone capable of such evil. The moral of this story isn't that good always triumphs over evil, or that the system always works, or that justice is always served. Sometimes it is, and I was lucky enough to experience one of those times. But the real lesson is simpler and more important. In the military, rank can hide corruption for a while, but character reveals everything eventually. Admiral Kendricks wore the same uniform I did. He held a higher rank. He commanded respect from subordinates and superiors alike. But when the moment came to choose between his career and my life, his true character was revealed. And no amount of rank or authority could hide what he really was, a coward and a fraud willing to commit murder to protect his lies. The courage it takes to serve isn't just about facing enemy fire or completing dangerous missions. Sometimes it's about having the strength to survive when the enemy is wearing your own uniform. Sometimes it's about refusing to give up when the system you've served faithfully betrays you in the most fundamental way possible. If you want more SEAL revenge stories like this video, subscribe and comment your country, because these stories deserve to be heard. Because every soldier who's ever been betrayed by corrupt leadership deserves to have their story told. And because the only way we prevent future Admiral Kendricks from reaching positions where they can destroy good soldiers is by exposing the truth about what really happens when honor is abandoned in favor of ambition. The fight doesn't end when you survive the fall. It doesn't end when justice is served. It continues every single day as you work to rebuild trust, to find meaning in service again, and to ensure that the sacrifice of better soldiers than Admiral Kendricks will ever be isn't forgotten or diminished by the corruption of men who should have protected them. That's the real battle. That's the fight that matters. And that's why I'm still here, still serving, still believing that the majority of people who wear this uniform understand what honor actually means. Because giving up, because letting the Admiral Kendricks of the world win, would be the real tragedy. And I've already fallen through enough darkness for one lifetime.